Hey, welcome back to the pod. Today we are talking to a friend of the pod, Mike Moll. This is his second time on. And that's the cool part when you do these podcasts long enough, you get some repeat guests. And today we're talking about Mike's transition into sales coaching specifically for solopreneurs, which is a pretty cool story. If you don't know who Mike is a former agency owner. He's ran his agency for the last 10 years. And in doing so, he's been able to earn over $500,000 a year while also working less than 20 hours a week. But in doing that, he's also built sales teams of over 25 people and has coached solopreneurs in marketing, bookkeeping, copywriting, wellness, and other industries. And he knows how important it is to be strong and confident with a proper sales process for your success. We dive into all of that in today's podcast, but just please note that I lost my voice during the recording, so please be patient with me. The pod had to go on. So with all that being said, here's my conversation with Mike. Mike, welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me. It feels like it's been an eternity since we talked last, but I'm glad to do it.
Ever since 2020, right? It's like those blur years. What just happened? Oh, we're like 5 years since talking to some people, 6 years.
Yeah,
But hey, we're doing this long enough now. We got friends of the pod coming back, which is pretty cool.
love that. Yeah, I actually had a conversation with my former media buyer. He just moved on, and we were talking about, he brought up to me the whole 2020 thing. He's like, "Remember when we lost all of our customers, but you just like kept us employed for some reason?" I was like, "Yeah, it just felt like the right thing to do." And it was just this weird, like I forgot about that. I was like, oh yeah, we just like kept it together, even though 80% of our revenue dropped over the course of a weekend and our entire pipeline died. And it was like, no, let's just figure this out. And yeah, that feels like a decade ago, but it was not just a few short years. So pretty wild.
Insane. I mean, that could be its own pod in itself. And I think we should talk about that, like the leadership and the mindset around that. You've made some moves, you made some changes since then. And like, can you give us a contrast? Like, what were you focusing on before? What's the new shift and the new focus? Because my goal really is to dive into what does that transition period look like? How did you evolve? What were the beliefs and why are you doing it? So can you just enlighten us? What was the contrast of what you were doing to what you're doing now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I ran a Google pay-per-click marketing company for about a decade. And at our peak, we had 6 employees. The majority of the time, we had 3 employees. And it was always designed for me to be more of a lifestyle thing. I never had a desire to have a massive scale, have massive responsibility. I knew I wanted to travel and experience the world and just feel that freedom. I think a lot of us entrepreneurs, freedom is like this North Star shining light that we're running towards. And so I built the agency based on that. And at the end of 2022, I had a moment, which we can talk about, that I decided I wanted to be away from it. There was a number of different reasons, and we'll get into that. But
Mhm.
what I pivoted towards after the Google PPC firm is taking that knowledge and helping people who are a few years earlier than me in the process help overcome a lot of the challenges that they're going to come up against. Because I was a very stubborn person. I didn't have a business coach until year 7 of my company. After I went through that process, when I look back, I realized how much bigger, more powerful, resilient the business could have been had I sought that attention, had I sought that help earlier in the process. I won't say I regret it because it's pointless to have a regret, but do I wish that I had taken that on in year 2 or 3 of the business? Absolutely. And so within that transition where I've moved to, and what I just spent November and December of last year defining was, what is that thing that, like, what's the biggest thing that I actually help people with? And so where we landed was sales coaching. And the reason for that is, within that, there's a whole bunch of things, right? If your positioning isn't right, your sales conversations don't land. If your pricing is not right, your business is not structured. And even if you're selling, it might not work out. And so going
Hmm.
back, there's all of those pieces that blend into sales, but we define it as sales training because that allows us to the end point, which is how the business needs to survive. Sales is the lifeblood of the company. But within that work, we go back and talk about, yeah, position, price, marketing, composing the structure of your team, those pieces. But the biggest thing is how to be confident and how to have a sales voice that feels like and sounds like you. Because there's a lot of processes that people try and fit in, right? They read a sales book or they watch the sales training. They, okay, this has to be my script because this is how this guy does it. And the
Mhm.
truth is, if you don't find your own voice, it's always going to sound awkward. It's always going to sound sometimes sleazy or like you're trying to convince someone. And when you go into a conversation, knowing that's the feeling you're going to have, it doesn't really work that well. And so
Yeah.
I help people find their own unique voice in sales.
I like that a lot because sales, in my opinion, and that this is obviously something that I learned from Zig, it's just a transference of emotion. And I remember like growing up in the sale or marketing world, I'd suck at sales because I was using a script. They work beautifully. I mean, they close clients, but it wasn't me. And then now, like I just have my own style of doing it because I just found the way that I like to treat it. And people have a better trust, more affinity, more open to like thinking of me as a strategic partner versus just a vendor or someone just trying to close them.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And
so
the
I
one,
think
so
there's an art to that too, though, to find your voice versus here's a methodology, but let's apply it to you, your circumstance, your ideal client.
yeah, absolutely. And the big contrast that I see is either the like, I'm afraid to go off the script because the script is the thing that makes me money, or I'm not going to move forward with any structure at all because I want this to be calm and relaxed. And both are not the right answer. And so it's finding that medium of like being in control of the call, having a structure, making sure that you get all the points that you need, not spending too much time diving into why they named their dog Teddy. Building rapport is important, but it shouldn't be 7 minutes of the call just because you want
Yeah.
to be relatable. So yeah, it's finding that balance.
And it takes time and practice. So it sounds like you niche down, like you were in a niche and then you niche down even further and that opened up a new vertical. So tell me more about that journey. There was something that you mentioned you wanted to bring up later, but tell me more about that journey. Like you reviewed what you were doing for people. It's the same thing, but it's just more focused.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think running Google PPC does have the net effect of creating revenue, right? Creating business growth. And the truth about the old agency is I wanted to be out of it for years.
Hmm.
But my sister worked in the company for 7 years, and I felt a responsibility to her. My long-term partner, Jenny, was a full-time employee in the company. And I was like, oh man. And my media buyer, Naz, like I brought him up and like groomed him into this. I mean, he had the talent, but I feel like I was close to him.
You had
And
a
I,
role. Yeah, you had a role to for his rock star. Yeah.
yeah. And for me, it was this feeling of obligation to them and not allowing myself to chase the thing that I wanted to. Because to me, it was like if I start from scratch, my family, my partner, my friend, everybody loses their job. And then I'm going to feel terrible. And then I don't even know exactly what I'm going to be doing, So it was just this like, it just kept me there for at least 2 years more than I wanted to be.
Hmm.
And within those 2 years, the coaching business started from the conversation with a friend. He was
Hmm.
pitching this big brand, a half-day workshop, and he goes, "Oh, this is the price I'm thinking. I don't want it to be here. I want it to be here." And it was this jump of maybe like $450.
Hmm.
And the problem was, even after he jumped the $400, I still think the price needed to be 5x what he was pitching. And he was
Yeah.
like, wait,
Yeah.
what? And it was like, yeah, man, you're pitching a big company and you're going to teach 30 people how to do something. And so even though it's a half day workshop, it's not the time. It's what is this going to give them? If I said, look, worst case, 30 people, two people actually listen, everybody else tunes out. One person actually takes action and they do half of what you teach them to do. What is the net outcome? And he goes, at least 6 figures. I said, okay, well, why are you talking about a $2,000 engagement then?
Like a
It's got
10
to
grand
be,
engagement.
it's got to be 10 grand. And yeah, so he chickened out by $100. He went 9,900, but they didn't blink. They were like, oh yeah, great, get in here. And that was that moment of like someone who I looked up to in the business world and respected and thought had everything together. And then I heard their price and I was like, oh man, this has got to be a more common problem than just him. If this
Hmm.
guy that I look up to has it. And so that's what, and for me, it was helping someone have the freedom that I had through my agency, working 15, 20 hours a week, being very comfortable, having the stability. I see people trying to figure it out on their own. And like for me, that one-to-one, creating that result for someone and giving them that freedom that I had, I get so incredibly like filled from that. Like my everything in my being, it's so fulfilling. And so for me, it was like that was like finally giving myself permission to say, I'm just gonna do that. Because
Hmm.
buying the ads for these mid-sized companies, yeah, they're happy that they're making more money, but it's just a number on a spreadsheet at the end of the day. They're not the owners, they're not super passionate about it. We run ads for a big law firm, for Volvo trucks. They're like, cool, we sold another truck. Nobody really cares. And that lack of fulfillment drove me away from the agency world.
You wanted to see a direct impact and you were focusing on value-based pricing and being able to teach others that. Tell me more about like, I know my voice is going away, but the pod must go on. Tell me more about the transition to selling the tangible. Because with media buying or buying ads, it's pretty simple, right? Like, I mean, the execution is not simple, obviously,
Yep.
but it's essentially, oh, I need this function in my team. I'm either going to hire it internally or outsource it. If I outsource it, what's the best agency? Do I build trust? I hire them, come on in. Pretty simple, right? Like they fill a need. Tell me about going from that to selling the ethereal, because not everyone hires a quote unquote coach. There's a
Yeah.
lot of quote unquote fake coaches and people who like I don't like being called a coach, even though some of the work I do is coaching. But
Yeah.
like, tell me about like transitioning to selling the ethereal, the intangible.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, the word coach, I get like little shivers when I hear it sometimes too. I would say what I do is 50% coaching, 50% consulting, right? I
Hmm.
am getting my hands dirty. I am looking at metrics with you and giving you suggestions. I'm not executing on them, but I'm in that process with you. But yeah, I mean, it was a huge transition. The one really nice thing that I had was the reputation, was the fact that I was on my podcast, on other people's podcasts, being featured and not even remotely internet famous, but like within that little niche to people that owned agencies, they got to see because I'm very open about how much time I spend, how much money I make. I'm very transparent. So they're like, I believe you. I like the way that you describe how you structure like life versus work, prioritizing travel, prioritizing enjoyment of life. And a lot of people, I think, in the coaching and consulting world, it's all just words like scale and rapid growth and explosive, whatever. And I'm like, I don't connect with those things. And so I think while I was running the agency, people would hear it and really resonate with how I thought about business and the world. And so a bunch of my first coaching clients just came from people saying, hey, how do I get what you have? And
Hmm.
eventually I got enough demand for it. I said, let me figure out how to package this. I don't even really know what it's going to look like, but let me try and take all the lessons that I've learned, build it into frameworks, build it into exercises, build it into tangible things that people could go through the process of. And my first couple coaching clients that I actually ever marketed for was on my email list. And the email literally said, I'm thinking about doing this thing. I have no idea I don't really know how to do it, but I know that I've done it. And so it's going to cost less than it ever will. And if in a couple months we don't get a result, I will literally just give you your money back. But I think I could teach people this, and driving some clients in through that started it. But now it's different. So I took all of last year to just take a breath, explore options, decide if it was going to be a different type of agency, maybe a SaaS business. I mean, I went to the ends of the world exploring what I might want to do. And in November and December, I made the decision in November that this coaching was going to be the thing. I completely rebranded. So I went back completely to the drawing board and I'm like, what is this thing? What is the promise? Who is the person I'm giving it to? Like, what does this all look like? And I spent 2 months not taking customers and just keeping a very low profile. I was on like the beaches of Ecuador literally for 2 months, just rebranding, studying Story Brand by Donald Miller, just playing with ideas. And I came out through hearing all the testimonials and all the feedback that I've gotten of, you fixed my sales process. You made me comfortable. You made me not scared of sales anymore. And I was like,
Hmm.
okay, that's it. And so this year, it's been a big transition of, okay, now that we're marketing this, what is the marketing? With the agency, it's very clear. They have to be a certain category of business. If we have a case study, we can show them exactly what we did, black and white numbers. It was easy. Right now, it is different. And so I've really leaned heavily into content. I've been posting
Hmm.
very consistently on LinkedIn. I've been getting out on podcasts. I restarted my podcast again. And I'm trying to find that groove of, should I be running meta ads? We've been experimenting with that, but I'm trying to figure out what the voice is to attract people into this thing. So yeah, it's been a journey this year for sure.
Yeah, so it's just optimization and It's pretty cool to hear that though, because you're being open and vulnerable, and two, it's like it's not just a one thing, click here, everything unlocks. I'm finding a lot that content from my end is number one. Did you rebrand the podcast too, or is it a brand new podcast?
Yeah, the apparently the horsepower of having 100 episodes, even if, because people aren't really going to go back and watch them. I was just told to like reface it and start recording again.
Hmm.
So I've got 16 episodes recorded that we're in the process of editing and figuring it out. To be honest, LinkedIn driving people to an email list has been the thing that's created, like, I didn't have any leads coming in. I mean, I had some recurring customers already, but I had maybe one lead from the time I started speaking about this again. So let's call it mid-Feb
Mhm.
until about a month ago. I had like one lead come in and that was it. So like a month goes by, a month
Yeah.
goes by, one lead comes in. And then this month, there's been six really qualified. And what I'm getting from people is, hey, I've been reading everything you're posting. It's really connecting with me. And like,
Mm.
it sounds like you know what it is that I need to fix. And so, like, long form to mid form written content has been the thing that's been driving all the leads in right now. I do think the power of video is important, and obviously it gives you reach on different platforms. So I'm in the process of figuring out how to manage that, hiring and bringing on people to help facilitate that. But yeah,
Mm.
like mid to long form writing on LinkedIn has been a game changer for me so far.
I love that. And then it goes to newsletter. Then from there, they're learning about you, the beliefs that they need to have, and they just reach out and create a conversation. It's more organic that way, I found too. People just reach out on LinkedIn or being on podcasts too. I think I get my best clients just from doing that. Tell me more about, like you mentioned earlier, getting permission to do this, and walk me through, because I mean, there's so many ways we can take this conversation, from the business strategies. What are you doing? How are you executing? And we can dive into some of that. But I think my key question is more about the mindset, because you mentioned two things. One, getting yourself permission to do this. Number two, you said you worked with like a coach or something. Like, what is that like? Why do we sometimes as entrepreneurs defer to get a coach? Like, let's talk about that process.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a level of belief in myself before this coach where it was like, okay, you're a guy, but you're not the guy.
Hmm.
And what I didn't understand with that statement, which was a statement that was very true in my mind, you're not the guy, is that you don't have permission or you don't deserve to make over a certain amount.
Hmm.
And if you do, your obligation now is to shrink the profitability on that by making things complicated, overinflating your expenses. Like
Hmm.
that was how I operated for a long time. And even in my agents, even in the peak years, like when I look back now and see it, the profit margins could have been staggeringly higher than they were, but I
Hmm.
didn't have permission to do it. And what I now understand, and I'll talk about the coach too, is that there are moments that happen at different parts of your life, typically early childhood, like pre 7 years old, that, and it could just be some kid on the playground at school made some comment. And in that moment, your subconscious made a decision to protect itself and it stuck to this belief and it defines even your actions and your decision making today. And I've always known that to be true. And I've worked with this woman who is an angel channeler and not in like the angels from heaven, could be your higher self. It could be, there's a couple different versions of what your quote unquote angels could be. I
Hmm.
also work with a breathwork coach. And between the two of them, I made a lot of progress in going back and what's called reparenting, right? Going back to these moments and like in a guided meditation, like going and watching that like a movie scene and then seeing it for what it was. And in a lot of our mindset, it's like we see these as really big things when it
Hmm.
was just a comment made in passing. And when we understand that your parent wasn't a god, your parent was just a person, and they may have said that thing, but they didn't mean it in the way that you took it and the way that you
Hmm.
held on to it. And so working with them, I really like started to unlock this feeling of like, okay, I can give myself permission or I have permission to do more. But honestly, the biggest shift in the last 60 days was this money mindset hypnotherapist. And it's, I mean, some of the exercises are just wild, but I think that's why the coaching business is accelerating as fast as it is. I'm not self-sabotaging and I'm not putting in the roadblocks that I used to put in. I'm
Mm.
like making fast decision. I'm making clear decision. And if something's not right, I'm happy to just cut it and move. But historically, what I would do, for example, in a marketing campaign, I'd be like, okay, we're going to run meta ads to this lead magnet, do this and this and this. And we know what goes into that because we ran a company that did it for 10 years. But what I would do with my stuff is I would overcomplicate the tech. Or I would say it would be nice if we had these three other things before we moved it forward. And so what I was
Mm.
doing was self-sabotaging. I was stacking things in the way because I didn't feel like I had permission to be the guy, to win, to
Mm.
massively accelerate, and not like, again, not scale to the moon, but scale to the top of my revenue desire and like high level of profitability, making X a month, and just like get there as soon as possible. Why does it have to be this long, drawn out suffering? And yeah, this unlock has been crazy. And I hit my monthly goal for the month on Sunday. I hit it yesterday.
Oh,
And I was like,
wow.
oh yeah, cool. Like let's just double it. Let's try and double it. See if we can double it now. Like I have no more restraints and it's been incredible. Like complete game changer.
That's pretty sweet. And I mean, I'm not sure if you mentioned it here in the pre-show, but you waited 7 years to work with someone. And that's something that I'm curious, like, what were the beliefs to be true? I think you already mentioned it, but why wait so long? And maybe it'd be good to reflect because myself or other people going in their business, it's like, how do you become aware
Yep.
that you need a coach? And then from there to seeking one out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the awareness always exists, but it's the ego and stubbornness that stop us from doing it. And so for me, where I grew up, it was like I didn't have the role model of entrepreneur. I had people in my family that worked 9 to 5 that did that thing, and I never understood it. I've always felt like an outcast. Like all my friends that I grew up with in high school are all brilliant, like engineers, astrophysicists, surgeons, and they had that path, which was like the get the education, get the job, do the thing, and they're all very happy in that. But I never really had that community, that role model, that anything. And so I think over time I grew very hyper independent. I had some really messed up things in my childhood as well that pushed me to like grow up very fast, pushed me to not have trust for anyone and only rely on myself. And I
Mm.
think those things bled into when I started the business, which was, okay, I'm doing this my way. No one gets to tell me what to do, and I'm going to figure it out. Even if I do it the wrong way for years and years, which I did. I almost
Mm.
lost the business several times, but it was this ego and this stubbornness of like, no one was ever there to protect me before. And so, like, why would I trust someone to guide me now? And it took until, yeah, like year 7 of the agency. And another guy was on his podcast. He actually emailed me, he goes, hey, I just interviewed this guy, Roland. I think you need to listen to this. And so I
Mm.
listened to the podcast and just, it clicked. I mean, just everything he said, the way he thought about business, the way he processed life, the way he extracted data in a unique way from the business. I was just like, oh man, like that's what I need. And the weird thing was I was 34. He was 6 years younger than me, but he had already
Oh,
sold
wow.
a multi-million-dollar business. And I was like, this 28-year-old guy, I don't know. I don't know. But just the like when I connected so strongly on the podcast, it was like I downloaded the lead magnet. I'd never looked at it. I just emailed him and I'm like, I don't care about your lead magnet. I just need to talk to you. And on Saturday afternoon, we scheduled on Monday, and I committed to a $40,000 program. Just there was just something there. It
Wow.
connected, it resonated, and I was like, boom, let's go. And yeah, it was the best decision I ever made. He took him a long time to get through to me, but talked me out of a lot of the self sabotage, helped
Mm.
me work through a lot of the mental blocks of like the permission and the self worth. And it was less, he still had some business advice, but we did a lot more like deep mic work than we did business consulting, which was interesting.
Isn't it fascinating? Because most of the business is simple, in my opinion, but it's a lot of us and the complexity that we bring to the business that we need to
Yeah.
figure out. And it's like just chipping away and letting who you are actually be yourself, be itself. I think that's the most fascinating part. But I also find it pretty fascinating the complete pivot and that you're being successful in this route. Tell me more about like what's up and coming in your journey and what excites you most.
Yeah, so part of my process of working with my money mindset hypnotherapist is that permission of I can have a business that makes a lot of money and it can go out and it can serve people and it can do a great job. And my prices just keep increasing. Almost every yes I get, I'm like, okay, so maybe that's not the threshold. What is the and I'm not looking to raise the price to gouge people, but when I look back and I say, okay, what did this create for the last 5 people that work with me? Oh, they like tripled their revenue. Oh, they shortened their client list and still hit their, revenue goal and hired 2 people to take all the work off their hand. I'm like, oh, wait, like these are life-changing things.
Mhm.
Like maybe this thing should be more. And so for me, I've got this board in the background for anybody on video, but on the podcast who are listening, it's a board that says, what are the big things I'm creating every month? It's but on one of the categories is what are you doing to enhance the product every month? And so
Mm.
some of that is education, and sometimes it's literal and sometimes it's like adjacent stuff. It's like learning to be a better listener is part of the process. So how do I do that? Studying other sales programs of like, okay, what are the other facets, pieces, nuggets, little things that I could incorporate into my program. So what am I doing to enhance and make this thing better? Whether that be turning something complicated into a framework or an exercise that someone can
Mm.
easily transition into. And so that's what I'm working on, just creating that. I've got a good flow for marketing. I'm going to be hiring 2 more people pretty soon to help with more video and outbound content. But I feel like it's in a good spot. And I feel like if I can just keep the consistency and keep the voice amplification of like how I think about the world in a true and approachable and like a real way, I've already seen it in 1 month. Like people connect with that message a it's not for everybody, certainly. And part of the questions that I ask when I'm evaluating about working with someone is like, what is the goal? What are you trying to hit here? If they're like, cool,
Mm.
yeah, I want to get to 20 people and grow this thing as soon as possible. I'm like, cool. There's other people for that. I'm not the guy.
Yeah.
But if you are just about to have your 3rd kid and you want to be able to spend 4 days a month, 5 days a month, 10 days a month completely off just hanging with your kids, and how do you maximize your time and energy and your money to facilitate that? Like we can talk.
Yeah.
So for me, it's about finding the ways to live life, finding the ways to create enjoyment while still delivering a service and finding your zone of genius, spending your time on that stuff.
No, I think that's pretty powerful there too, because some of the words that I used to use, I changed based on the people that I serve. And it's going back to that. It's like, how do you live the life? I don't want to just do all this. I want to do this, but also make a deeper impact. I also want to enjoy the journey. I also want to work till like 9 p.m. every day. So it's pretty fascinating how just a micro adjustment. And that's what I think we all learned, what, 4 or 5 years ago. Like, we got to enjoy the journey, do good work, but then also build real relationships with those around us. And I think that's a
Yeah.
holistic life versus just growth for all sake, which is
Yep.
vanity.
Yeah, and I think 2020 was a good eye opener because we saw things go wrong. We lost people, we whatever. I wasn't close with my father, but like he, unrelated to COVID, he already had cancer. He died 2 days before his 61st birthday.
Oh, wow.
And this was a guy that played 5 different sports, was in every different kind of league, was like my athletic hero growing up. Even in my 20s, we played in the same ball hockey league. Like, so he was
Wow.
out there and people are like, oh, that's like the fastest guy here. I'm like, that's my dad. And they're like, yeah, I mean, he's fast. So he wasn't good with his diet for sure. And although we weren't close in a father and son way, it was just like this wild experience for him to grind to a halt and just like suffer for 2 years and then one
Yeah,
day
that's
just be
rough.
gone at 60. I'm like, okay, I'm 38. I mean, if I'm going at the same time and I have 22 years left, like, man, you really need to live them. You should live every moment.
No, I hear that and respect. My condolences. No, I think it's part of the journey. And I appreciate that a lot. For people listening, where's the best place for them to thank you for being on and learn more about what you're up to?
Yeah, I think Instagram is probably where I'm the most fun. I'm a full-time traveler as well as working on the business. So there's usually some fun stuff over there at the Mike Moll, Mikemoll.
Sweet. We'll put that link in the show notes. Mike, thanks again, man.
Yeah, appreciate you having me, man.
Thank you for listening to the podcast. If you'd like to get more of these podcasts, please go ahead and subscribe to wherever you're watching or listening to the pod. If you have any suggestions or questions that you want me to answer on the pod, or you have a guest that you want me to interview, please go ahead and email me all of your suggestions and questions at podcast@dogoodwork.io. That's podcast@dogoodwork.io. If you'd like to give me public feedback, you can go on Apple Podcasts, and from there you can leave up to a 5-star review. I would greatly appreciate that. If you like more free resources where you can get my best strategies to help you increase your company's performance and scale profitably, you can get handpicked articles to propel your growth, and you can get trainings and discussions that I give freely online, as well as low-cost resources such as my books and guides. You can get all of that by going to dogoodwork.io/free-growth-resources. 90% of all these resources are not behind any email opt-ins. You can get instant access by going to dogoodwork.io/free-growth-resources. Now, if you'd like to accelerate your progress and shorten the gap between information and action and start seeing results in your business, let's work together to increase your company's performance and scale profitably and serve more clients without the overwhelm. You can request a free clarity call to see how we can best support you to reach your goals by going to dogoodwork.io/apply. Again, that's dogoodwork.io/apply. As always, it's an honor to be a small part in your journey. This is Raul Hernandez. Do good work.